G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Alicia Butler Pierre from Equilibria, based in Atlanta, USA. Thanks for your time today, Alicia.
Thank you, Troy, for having me.
Let's start with how we know each other. So Erica on your team reached out, thought you might be a good guest to have on the cast.
Yes, she did. She's an amazing executive assistant.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
At Equilibria, we specialize in helping fast-growing businesses scale without the chaos. And we do that through what we call business infrastructure. And I know, Troy, this is also a passion of yours as well. And the way we make money is through a combination of coaching services. We're starting to do less of the consulting type projects, and we're really moving more towards teaching platforms. So offering online courses and offering workshops and webinars as well. That's how we're actually starting to scale Equilibria.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, a lot of businesses have moved to the online course delivery.
Yes.
Mark Ritson on the course, episode 200. I know you've listened to a few casts, but if you haven't gone back to number 200, I highly encourage you to look at that one. He was a marketing professor for 25 years, taught at MIT, London Business School, Melbourne Business School, as well as consulting to some of the big brands around the world like Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. And 6 years ago, when his first child came along, he decided to stop traveling, 6 months of the year and consulting, even though he's earning good money, and move to an online course. And he's had over 20,000 students through his 2 courses now, and doing, as he says in the cast, 10 figures a year. So between 10 and 20 million in sales with a team of only 8. So it's a huge movement. And he's got a really interesting take on education because he's been a professor for so long, teaching in the classroom, but he believes that online courses are much more effective and with webinars and, group coaching, et cetera, is more effective than, particularly for business school, like doing an MBA, where a lot of people have to go in on a weekend to, steal that time away from their family. It was a really interesting take. So episode 200, if you get to it, go back and have a listen.
I will definitely go and check that out. Thank you.
And how did you start out?
I started out, Troy, back in 2005. The company originated as a professional organizing company, believe it or not. And what I noticed was about 85 to 90% of the customers that I worked with, they weren't chronically disorganized. They certainly weren't hoarders by any stretch of the imagination. But they did have trouble keeping systems and processes in place. And they were home-based business owners. So these weren't people who needed their bedroom closet organized, for example, or their basements. These were people who were operating home-based businesses. And what I realized, Troy, is that it was more than just going in and tidying up, so to speak. And that's no shade toward Marie Kondo there, but they did need those processes and systems to make sure that whenever things get into a chaotic state again, because they inevitably will, it's just the nature of business, right? That they would at least have a process that they could fall back on. And as I started doing more of that type of work and really leaning on my background as a process engineer, I eventually changed that language from professional organizing to business infrastructure.
Yep.
And that's when I really took my show on the road and started working with commercial, quote unquote, commercial type businesses as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good thing. I'm very system and process orientated as well. And if you can encourage the business owners just to change that small habit of when shit goes wrong, stop and think, right, can we put a process in place or a system or automate it so it doesn't happen again next time? And just that incremental change, even over a year, getting that mindset and habit change within the business owner and the other people in the business can have a huge effect because they get out of that death spiral of just chaos extremely well. So 2005 you started, and how old were you when you Jumped.
I was the ripe age of, I think I was 29.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm about to be 46.
Yep. That's
So
good math. And
it's hard. It's so hard to believe because it literally seems like yesterday.
yeah. Yes, I know. Something reminded me the other day. It's 27 years since I was at university. I think it was. Yeah,
Oh
27
my
years
gosh.
ago.
Wow.
And did you jump from a corporate job?
I did. I did. So my background is actually in chemical engineering, Troy.
Yep.
And I was working in different oil refineries and chemical plants. And so as a my job in that environment, I worked as what's called a process engineer.
Yep.
So I literally was monitoring whatever product was being produced, whether it was refining oil into gasoline or making Roundup when I worked at Monsanto. We literally were trying to figure out if for whatever reason a particular batch of product did not meet a certain specification. As the process engineer, it was my job to figure out what went wrong in the manufacturing of that particular batch of product to cause it to not meet the specification.
Yep.
And I realized very quickly I did not want to spend the rest of my career in these hot oil refineries wearing all of this protective clothing, the hard hat, the steel toe boots, the whole, the entire getup. And it's not to mention it's burning up outside. But beyond that, I realized, Troy, I didn't understand the business of refining oil or the business of making Roundup. And so every month we would have these meetings with different accountants that were assigned to different parts of the plant. And it was as though they were speaking another language. I didn't really have a true appreciation for why there were such what seemed to be erratic or sometimes manic fluctuations in production schedules. What was driving that? I didn't understand the forces of supply and demand and how that literally played out in terms of those day-to-day production schedules. So I did decide to go and pursue my MBA. So it's funny you mentioned that online courses are now much more effective than even taking an MBA. But it truly did open up a whole new world for me, Troy.
Yep.
And once I completed my MBA, I abruptly quit my job. And that was around September 2004. I graduated with my MBA December 2005, December 2004. January 2005, I decided to relocate to a city where I only knew one person, and that is Atlanta. So I was living in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Love it there. Beautiful.
So I'm from Louisiana, but I just had this feeling, this intuitive thought, this gut feeling, if you will, Troy, that I needed to get out of New Orleans. And as fate would have it, I officially relocated to Atlanta to February 2005. 6 months later, the infamous Hurricane Katrina happened.
Oh.
So I really thought that I was going to work at Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is headquartered here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I thought, wow, I'm this freshly minted MBA. I have this chemical engineering background. Why wouldn't they want to hire me? But as I found out, when you're searching for a job, it can be such a soulless activity.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes you spend so much time crafting your resume to apply for these different jobs, and you may not hear anything. And so I decided, Troy, to redirect the time, effort, and energy that I was spending in trying to look for a job working for someone else into creating my own opportunity. And I never looked back.
Right. Fantastic. I was going to ask, have you read the book The Goal by Alicia Goldratt?
Oh, of course. Of course. I love that book.
Yeah, I listened to it a year or so ago. It's I think it was written in the late 80s or the 90s. That's a solid book in your space, particularly.
It's very good. Very good book. Absolutely.
And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business?
It's funny you ask that because I functioned solo for quite some time, Troy. And I should explain what I mean when I say solo, because I don't believe there's a such thing as a solopreneur, because you always have others in your ecosystem. But as far as growing a dedicated team, that really started to happen over the past 5 years. So it's gone from me, one person, to anywhere from 12 to 15 people.
Great.
And we have a team of independent contractors, some of whom are dedicated resources. And we do independent contractors. I'm sure you already know and can appreciate this. It's so much less expensive to work with independent contractors than it is employees. And because a good portion of my team is international, it just helps, with, in terms of labor law and getting involved with all of the regulatory things that can go into having actual employees in different countries.
Yeah.
So yes, and truthfully, I will credit two things, Troy, to that phenomenal growth. Actually, three. The first is writing a book. I wrote a book and that launched in 2018. The same year I started a podcast. Those two things alone really changed the trajectory of my business. And then the third thing is COVID.
Yep.
Now, here's what's interesting, Troy. I had been on the digitization train for a long time, and I was just waiting on others to board that train with me.
Everyone jumped on at the start of 2020.
They did not want to do it, Troy. Everything, they insisted on things being done face to face. And as you know, that can really stifle your growth also.
Yeah.
But COVID comes on the scene in 2020, and now all of a sudden we have no choice but to work remotely or virtually. And so those three factors combined really helped me position Equilibria to where I could truly grow this dedicated team and just start scaling, literally practicing what I've been preaching for the past 17 years.
Yep. Great. So the first 12 years, it was pretty much just yourself, and then you started bringing independent contractors on 2017 or 18.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
And do you have any other key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth?
Gosh. I don't like sharing revenue numbers. I'm not sure what other numbers we could talk about in terms of KPIs.
Or rough percentage growth of either clients or top line in the even...
Oh gosh. Oh, I can definitely. So I can share a very good success story.
Yep.
Actually, that happened over COVID. So there was this one client that I worked with. They reached out to me. It was a family-owned business that had been in existence at the time that I started working with them for 30 years.
Wow.
And the owner was ready to transition out of the business. He's hand-selected a successor, he intentionally chose someone outside of the company, which was fairly controversial because it was a family-owned business. So many people naturally thought it would be one of his children, but he intentionally chose someone else.
Dinner time would have been awkward, I'm sure.
So he chose this outside successor. And one of the first things that person did was reach out to tell his wife about some of the things that he noticed that kind of troubled him. And he said, I have this huge growth plan, and I just need someone to come in and kind of help us put in a structure. He didn't use the term business infrastructure, but it turns out I know his wife. Mm-hmm. She made the introduction. We started working together in 2019. So this was right before COVID. And he had this goal of $30 million in revenue, top line revenue. They actually did $2 billion in top line revenue at the end of 2021.
Wow.
The only reason I know this, Troy, and I wish I could show you this beautiful card that he sent to me last December, because I kind of lost touch with him during the latter part of 2021. There was just so much going on. But out of nowhere, I received this beautiful card from him, the new CEO. And he said, Alicia, I just have to share with you what we've been doing. Because of the business infrastructure that we put into place back in 2019, they were ready, Troy. They were ready for the growth.
Yep.
When COVID happened, they're in the payments processing industry.
Yep.
So as you can imagine, the amount of transactions that went up was just through the roof. But the important lesson here, and I hope that those who are listening really take this to heart, you can spend so much time on the marketing, the sales, the promotion, the branding, all of the things to attract the customers to you. But once they come through your door or they come to your website, Do you have the operational or the business infrastructure to support that demand?
Yep.
So that's what I mean, Troy, when I say they were ready. Once COVID happened and more online transactions were taking place, they had that business infrastructure to support that double, triple growth in payment transactions online.
And
so that is such a recent story, and I'm so happy for them. It was so exciting, and it was such a, I mean, you can see me now. I'm just beaming like a proud mama.
That's phenomenal growth. So well over the $30 million target.
Well over the 30, because, you know, who could have imagined that COVID was going to happen, right? And so, yeah, it's just so interesting. They had that one revenue goal, and oh my gosh, go from 30 million to 2 billion.
Yeah, there's a lot of businesses that wouldn't have been able to achieve that, and many would have gone under just with the pressure of that growth, with getting out the right systems. And I think a lot of small business owners in particular, you alluded to it a minute ago, they invest a lot of time and money in marketing without, and I've had a few guests on really interestingly have said they've stopped growth, they've plateaued for a while to go back internally to fix systems and operational efficiencies and excellence, because it can be a fool's errand just piling in new customers. And if they're getting a poor service, you know, the response times are days, you know, that they're going to churn, they're going to move away from the business, and you're just spending money acquiring new customers to piss more off that are going to walk. So hugely important to marketing, as well as to make sure that customer delivery. I assume you would have read the E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
It's a great example in there that he talks about going to get a haircut and the inconsistency of that service. The first haircut was great, the experience, and the next one was different, and you didn't get offered a cup of tea or coffee. And the third time was different again, and you know, eventually it moved away from that hairdresser. But that consistency not just brings production efficiencies, but also it maximizes the customer experience.
Right, and I love the fact that you brought up the E-Myth, because, as you know, he talks about the entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager, and how the overwhelming majority of people who start their businesses are really just technicians. And all they've done is they've built a glorified job for themselves.
That's right.
But if you are serious about not just growing, but also scaling your business, even if you don't have the vision that a typical entrepreneur would have, or the manager who's running around and dotting all of the I's and crossing all of the T's and making sure that the policies and the procedures are in place, make sure you get those people around you to complement whatever your skill set is.
Yeah, absolutely. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
I knew I succeeded, Troy, when people that I did not know were starting to reach out to me and say, Alicia, I saw you on this. I saw you on Troy's Grow a Small Bit, or I heard you on Troy's Grow a Small Business podcast, or I saw you on when you were interviewed on this particular TV show, or I read this article that you wrote. It's one thing when you've built up a network, and through business development, you've developed all of these relationships with people that you already know. But when strangers actually start reaching out to you and saying, hey, you know what? This actually happened, true story, about 3 weeks ago. Someone reached out to me and he said, I'm a visual learner. So I specifically went to YouTube looking for assistance. This is the state of my company. I'm in the medical equipment sales business. We're growing in leaps and bounds. We need structure. I went to YouTube looking for a solution, and there I see you using, you know, these stick figures. I don't know if you can see this here. Stick figures and index cards. And I gave this demonstration, Troy, and that really resonated with him. By the time he sent me an email and reached out to me, he said, listen, I saw the video on YouTube first. I bought your book. I listened to your podcast. He started naming all of these things, and I was thinking, wow, this guy is really serious. He's done his homework, and he is ready to do business. That's when I knew. It's moments like that, Troy, when I know I've succeeded, because these aren't people that I know or who know someone that I know. These are complete strangers with absolutely no connection to me, who are starting to reach out and say, can we please work together?
Yeah, it's a great feeling, isn't it?
It is. Indeed, it is.
What does success look like to you?
Success is living life on my terms and being able to keep a roof over my head and food in my mouth in the process. So I know so many people assign a financial or monetary value to success, but honestly, Troy, I just recently had surgery. I'm rethinking a lot of things. I'm rethinking the way I do a lot of things, the hustle and the grind, and wondering at the end of the day, is it all really worth it? Just working smarter. And I know this sounds very cliche, but working smarter and not harder.
Yep.
But that's truly how I define success, is the fact that I have been able to capitalize on my knowledge, my skill set, and literally grow this business from scratch. There was no blueprint. There wasn't a business infrastructure, how to start a business infrastructure consulting business that I purchased. It wasn't like I purchased a franchise. And that's not a knock against anyone who does that. But you know what I mean. There's a very big difference between truly starting something from scratch versus buying into a system that's tried and tested and proven. And as long as you buy the blueprint and you follow all of the instructions, you should be relatively successful. So that's what success is for me. The fact that I started this from scratch, built it around my skill set, and I'm able to financially support myself and the people who are on my team.
Yep.
They're in turn able to support themselves and their families as well.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Marketing a fast-growing business. See, that's interesting because I'm all about operations. So I'll say this. When you are marketing a fast-growing business, just be prepared for the avalanche. There's a quote that I love saying, we're all one viral moment away from disaster or catastrophe. So just be very careful, whether it's a content marketing strategy that you're deploying, online, digital advertising. If your strategy is to write for high profile publications and hope that that's the way that people are going to come into your business, you have this robust YouTube channel, whatever it looks like for you, just make sure that all of the things that you're doing to make your business look good on the outside, that you have the operational structure or the business infrastructure to look just as good on the inside.
Yep.
Just make sure you have that foundation in place so that you can handle what comes with having a viral moment, for example.
Yep. How did you fund your business?
I funded my business initially through my own savings. And it's so interesting that you asked that question, Troy, because for the first time ever, I actually started applying for loans this year. I'm working with a fintech company that is based in California called Tillful. And it's a really great company. I've interviewed them on my own podcast, and I just really believe in the values that they espouse. And we've been working together. And it's actually opened my eyes to why I probably ran into issues in the past in raising capital. Things like, for example, the importance of having a commercial space.
Yep.
I had commercial space back in 2008. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm going to my clients instead of them coming to me. Why am I paying, all of this money for rent every month or leasing this space when I could just be working from home because my clients weren't coming to me anyway? Well, I didn't realize that was actually hurting me. So just imagine if I had kept that space. The other thing I didn't realize, because I'm here in the US, we have the Small Business Administration, the SBA.
Yep.
I have received loans in the past, Troy, SBA loans. They've all been paid off. But here's what I didn't realize. With the SBA, those loans, they do not report to the credit bureaus.
Right.
So even though you have this, what you think is a stellar credit history, and you've paid off those loans, you always made your payments on time, you may have even paid that loan off early, it's all for nothing because it does nothing toward building your business's credit score. So that's why I am actively seeking outside funding so that I can make sure that the business has a really strong and healthy credit score.
Yep. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
I would. I things would have moved a lot faster, obviously, once you are well funded and you have that capital. So I would have been able to build the team. I would have been able to build that software that I've been wanting to build for such a long time. But I think what more than anything, what funding would have given me in the early stages is when I first had this idea for software, Troy, I would have been able to have a dedicated team of developers. When you're doing things piecemeal, ad hoc, it just wasn't a good look for me. And to be honest with you, I lost my financial shirt. Not ashamed to admit that because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm dealing with these different developers, and the churn and the attrition within that industry is, oh my gosh,
It's huge.
it's insane. It is insane. And you really do have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on,
Yep.
even though you may not understand coding or you yourself may not be a developer. Make sure you partner with someone who does, because it's so easy to be taken advantage of in that industry. And the amount of intellectual theft
Yes.
that goes on is just rampant. So that is definitely something that being funded earlier would have afforded my company. And who knows where Equilibria would be today.
Yep.
if I had had that funding early on.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Oh, COVID. Without question, COVID. And let me tell you why. It was a good thing.
Yep.
But it was stressful because scaling is painful. Yep. It's chaotic. And because I was already laying the groundwork for working remotely, 100% remotely anyway, there was just this huge influx of business. And here's one of the first things I realized very quickly, Troy, was that almost every single technology that I had for Equilibria needed to be upgraded or completely replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know how that is.
Yep.
Whenever you're upgrading or replacing technology, it's not fun. It's not quick.
No.
You may think that, oh, well, we're just upgrading from the silver plan to the platinum plan. How difficult could that be? Well, you just never know. And then you start to realize that certain technologies don't integrate or communicate seamlessly with each other. It was a nightmare. The website went down.
Yep.
Our website was hosted by GoDaddy. And because GoDaddy received an influx of business that they weren't prepared for, the sites started going down. Cybersecurity threats were on the rise, even for small businesses. It was a mess. It was the perfect storm for it was the perfect storm for an operational disaster. So the stresses of just the technological aspect of growing the business was really intense. And I actually hired another employee during that time, an actual employee and not an independent contractor. And gee, did that money go fast. I mean, the amount of money that I was paying in taxes and all of these other things. So again, almost losing my financial shirt.
Yep.
So I just had to retreat, get smarter about how I was truly going to grow the team, what's the best way financially, what makes most sense. And that's when I said, the business model just has to allow for independent contractors.
Yeah. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
The technology.
Yep.
Absolutely the technology, because the knowledge is there. The fundamental knowledge about operations management, Lean Six Sigma, processes, systems, business infrastructure, that's there, right, Troy? And I have this framework that I developed, and it's pretty turnkey, and it was largely manual for a really long time. But as you know, in order to scale, and when we talk about scaling, that means using, if not the same amount of resources or inputs, but decreasing them, but getting so much more out of it in terms of the output, right? And that's where technology comes into place. Where can you start to automate certain things? Can you digitize certain things? Can things be stored in the cloud? Stop doing all of this work manually and figure out how you can leverage different digital technologies to automate a lot of what you're doing. That learning curve can be very steep. Oftentimes, you may find that no matter how much homework you do up front, you may still make an investment in a certain technology only to realize that, again, it may not integrate very nicely with some of the other technologies that you're using. And so you're trying to streamline your efforts, but all you've done is you've probably increased the amount of time that it may take to perform a certain task, because you might have to enter data into two or more different systems, the exact same data. So the technology piece has definitely been the biggest challenge, but it's also the area for the most growth and opportunity. So I take the challenge on now and I embrace it full steam ahead.
What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth? Also technology?
Technology, but also because my business, the operations are 100% virtual at this point, Troy. I personally find it very challenging being on the computer all the time. It feels like a ball and chain. I feel as though I always have to be connected to a device. And sometimes I just want to walk away. I just want to take a walk outside, or I just need to be able to move around physically. So when you don't have the benefit of being in a traditional, even though I have office space, there aren't people on my team who are there with me. And sometimes there are things that are just done better face to face. I mean, that's just the truth of it. But that is one of the things I'm personally dealing with the most, that I find to be incredibly challenging. It's just this need to always be on the computer or on a tablet or having your phone in the palm of your hand. Just this need to always be on, and with all of the alerts and the notifications that are constantly coming through, it's a lot. It's a lot to process. And by the time I wrap up by the end of each day, I'm exhausted.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. There's so much to love about growing a small business. I love, Troy, comparing. This is where dashboards can be so helpful. I love comparing where we were versus where we are today. It's so telling. And as you know, you're again, you're just in the hustle and bustle of each day. And oftentimes it's not until you actually stop and you reflect and you look back on, well, let's see what happened over the past 3 months. What about the past year?
Mm-hmm.
What about the past 3 years, 5 years, so forth and so on? And you realize just how much you've accomplished. I would recommend that to anyone who's listening.
Yep.
Just really stop for a moment, pause, and go back to your very first year in business. Look at some of those old files that you might still have and compare it to where you are now. And, sometimes I can be really hard on myself, Troy, and I'll think, I should be so much farther ahead. Alicia, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. And look at what this person is doing, or look at what that person is doing. But really, I should be comparing my progress against my starting point. And that's when I become grounded even more. And that's one of just many rewards of actually growing a business. And one of my favorite things about growing a business is to just see that growth and that progression.
I think that's a really good point. Business owners will often not stop and reflect on the success they've had. They just keep going, what's the next thing? I'm very much wired that way, and I have to deliberately think about, particularly if I'm working with a team or I've got direct reports, which I haven't had for some years, but stopping and celebrating, for most people, it's more important to them than it is to me, but it is also important to me to stop and take a breath and reflect on that journey and what you've achieved in that time.
Absolutely.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
The biggest mindset shift. Delegation. And again, this is something that I often preach to my own clients, but I wasn't practicing it, to be honest with you, Troy. But over the past 5 years, as I've been growing the team, I've become more and more comfortable with letting other people babysit my baby, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Because again, when you have started something from scratch, it's very easy to think, well, no one else can do this the way that I can. And I'm certainly not a micromanager by any stretch of the imagination, but I had to learn. It really is, it requires a paradigm shift. At least for me, it did. From wanting to do everything or feeling as though, well, if I don't do it, it just won't be done correctly. But that's where your processes come into play. When you really document what the standards are and what the expectations are for performance of that process, and you have associated metrics that you can use as a guide to measure performance. And if for whatever reason you're seeing that someone for whatever reason is not performing up to par, it gives you the opportunity to provide further coaching and training. But the point is, that was definitely, I would say, one of the biggest mindset shifts that I personally had to make, was becoming comfortable with delegation.
Yeah, it's hard for business owners to let go. We're more controlling in that sense. I think most of us are quite that way, but it is very powerful if you can let go of that.
Yeah, and things will go wrong. So for those listening, but you can't micromanage.
No.
Because you have to let go in order to grow. That's another mantra of mine. And again, it just gives you opportunity to provide further coaching. Always blame the process before you blame the person. So if someone did not do something according to the standards or the specifications that you've set in place, is it because you didn't document it?
Exactly.
Did you miss a step or two in the process? Always go back and analyze whatever that process is before you blame the person. And if it turns out that the process is in fact well documented and this person just for whatever reason chose not to follow it, then that's a different conversation. But again, as a general rule of thumb and best practice, always blame that process before you blame the person.
One of my favorite Peter Drucker quotes: communication is what the listener does. So it's up to me, if I'm imparting some training or handing something over to you, it's my responsibility to make sure you understand it. And I think a lot of business owners who can't spell delegate, aren't very good at that, or having the patience. Just if someone's going to do it at 80% as good as you, just hand it over. Be patient.
That's right.
Make sure you.
That's right.
I like to hand stuff over, particularly through an operations manual. So documented. Here's some policies or procedures, steps that you need to take, depending on the type of person, whether they prefer to read it before we talk about it. Other people, they'd rather talk about it and then read it, but then at least they've got something to go off. And yes, they're going to make a few mistakes, but you just be patient and keep coaching them and supporting them, because people want to take on more responsibility. That's the other thing. Good people, if you've done your job as, in recruitment, good people are there to do good work and they want the business to, move forward. So
yes,
and the more stuff.
Great point.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think it's more of well, actually, can I say three things? It's one of my mantras. So I don't know about where you are, but in America, we have I grew up hearing the 3 R's. Always remember the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yep.
So this is what I would encourage those who are listening to this. Here's how you can apply this to maintaining, growing, building, operating, scaling your business. Read something every day. You've mentioned some excellent books, Troy: The Goal, The E-Myth. There's so many more. The one book that has personally changed my life and really made me a better business person is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Okay. So in terms of arithmetic, measure something every day. We've been talking about metrics and KPIs, and what are some of the things that you could look at to let you know if you're on track? And then when it comes to the writing piece, write something. Write about what your skill is, write about your craft. Whether it's a long prose for a LinkedIn post, something you put on Facebook, an actual article that you write, get in the habit of writing every day. And when you consistently read, write, and measure what you're doing every day, oh my gosh, I can't begin to tell you what that will do for you not only as a business owner, but as a leader as well.
Jump over to growasmallbusiness.com and leave your details to get a short 2-minute email I send on Fridays to help small business owners like you become better leaders. I include some reading or professional development resources I've discovered in the last week.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
The wins are, obviously you have people that you can delegate, you can grow that much quicker when you have more people. It's all about concentration versus dilution. So when you have diluted your own efforts because you're doing everything, you're a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Yep.
But once you start delegating, especially administrative type tasks, if you yourself are the CEO or the founder, the person that's in charge at the end of the day, you shouldn't be spending your time, filing paperwork or making sure that things are, digital files are organized, all of those administrative type things. Delegate that to someone else. And that way you can really start to concentrate on what you should be doing.
Yep.
And watch how much it expands. Some of the setbacks, be very clear about what you need help with. Be as transparent as you possibly can be. I had this happen to me years ago, Troy, the very first time I ever attempted to hire a virtual assistant. And one of the things she told me was, I really don't like talking on the phone to people. And I thought, okay, that's going to be an issue because I don't like talking on the phone to people. So again, remember at the beginning, we were talking about surrounding yourself with people who complement your skill set and who can do things that maybe you can't do or don't want to do. But against my better judgment, Troy, I hired her anyway, and it was a disaster. And why did I hire her? Because I was so desperate to have a body fill that seat.
Warm body syndrome.
Yes. And it was disastrous.
Yeah.
Because and I knew it. So shame on me, right? Because she told me, that's not something that I like to do. And what did I do? I hired her anyway because I was like, man, I need help and I need it quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Yeah.
I paid the cost.
Yeah. As you would have seen, though, the chasm between an A and a B player is massive. Not just the complementing skill sets, but also the attitude. If you get the right people on your bus, as Jim Collins talks about, it's miles apart between a team of B players or even C players, God help us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Culture starts with the leadership. I'm a big advocate of leading by example and not just saying words, because words can be empty.
Yep.
But if you show people what the expectations are, if you show people excellence, it will permeate through your organization. For me, the tenets of our culture, continuous learning. You have to have an insatiable appetite to learn new things. It's the only way we can continue to grow and innovate. 2, we have a zero tolerance for any form of discrimination. And then 3rd, you have to have fun. Yep. You have to like to laugh. I mean, this is serious, but don't take yourself seriously.
Yeah.
And that's that's something that's such an integral part of our culture. And there are questions that you can ask in the recruiting or interviewing process to know whether or not someone can meet whatever the tenets are of your company culture. That just happens to be the tenets of our company culture. But yes, I really believe that you just have to practice and be the, kind of like Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see.
Yep.
Truer words were never spoken.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Well, Troy, I have not been great at handling balance. And it's so funny because my company, the name is Equilibria.
Yep.
And just to demonstrate why I say, or not to demonstrate, but just to give you a personal example here of what I mean by I'm not the best person probably to talk about balance. So I had a major surgery recently. And I really do believe that because I was just grinding and just pushing and pushing and pushing and not stopping, Troy, when all signs were pointing to, hey, stop, take a break, I kept going anyway. And so it manifested itself in the form of some benign tumors that I had, and I had to get those removed. And that has been a serious wake-up call. I don't want that to happen to anyone who's listening to this right now. Please pay attention to the warning signs. Your body will always tell you when it's time to stop, take a break, take a vacation. If you can't take a vacation, at least go take a walk outside, be in nature, breathe in some fresh air. It will do you, your body, and your business a world of good. So I am now getting a lot better, Troy, when it comes to balance. One of the things that I've started doing ever since my surgery, since I've been recovering, I stop at 6 p.m.
Yep.
So as soon as our interview is over, that's it for me. I'm done for the day. Because you know what I've convinced myself of? Alicia, it will be there tomorrow.
That's right. We'll always have something in our inbox.
It will be there tomorrow. So don't push yourself and stay up another 3 or 4 hours. Just give it a rest.
I think it's a challenge for us. I also struggle because I love what I do. So I have to put things in place, like my chocolate Labrador is downstairs snoring on the couch at the moment. Take him out for bush walk most days, get me out of the house, pick my daughter up from school and drop off, etc. Otherwise, I could work 80 hours a week. I used to work 100-hour weeks, which is unsustainable and very unhealthy. Yeah. Well, that was 7 years ago when I was much younger and had more energy. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how much professional development have you invested in yourself?
Oh, my goodness. Constant investment. I am always purchasing a course. I'm always watching someone's webinar. I participate in workshops. I attend NetWell now that we're able to get out and move about a little bit more freely than we have been over the past 2 years. I'm starting to attend networking events again. You have to invest in your professional development. Learning is I mentioned this is a tenet of our company culture here at Equilibria, continuous education. Learn continuously. The day that you think that you've mastered something is the day that you've stopped learning.
Yep.
There's always something to learn, even if it's from a child. You can learn from anyone. So I don't ever want to be so egotistical that I think that there is no further room for growth, development, or education in any subject.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, Henry Ford, anyone who stops learning is old.
Have
you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Absolutely. I have several mentors. I've hired different coaches over the years. In fact, I remember hiring a digital coach at the beginning of 2018. That was the person really that I should credit for giving me the confidence that I didn't think I had within me to actually write a book. And he's also the person who encouraged me to start a podcast. I would have never thought to do either of those two things were it not for that particular coach and literally pushing me to do something that was completely out of my comfort zone. And again, I didn't think I had it in me, Troy. I didn't think I could host a podcast, let alone a weekly one. And I've been doing that for the past 4 years. I didn't think I could write a book. It ended up being, I think it's a little shy of 300 pages.
Wow. Yeah.
I didn't think I could do that. But it's amazing what happens when you have people who they're holding you accountable.
And
they're pushing you.
Yeah.
They're challenging you. And again, kind of this ties in very nicely with what we were talking about before when we said, when you look at that finished product, that end result of that book, compared to 12 months prior, and you're thinking, I can't do this. This will never work. I don't have the money. I don't know I can't do this. It won't work. And then you look at 12 months later, when you have that book in your hand, oh my gosh, what an amazing feeling.
Yeah. Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
I do have advisors. We don't have a board of directors, but I definitely have advisors for sure.
How often do you meet with your advisors?
So I meet with them informally. Mm-hmm. And I am a huge advocate, again, of talking and receiving advice from people who have areas of expertise that I do not have areas of expertise in. So there's someone that I speak to regarding HR or human resource related issues. There are tons of people that I talk to regarding marketing. In fact, I had a very lively discussion with someone right before this interview regarding a marketing strategy for the online course that we're about to release. There are people that I talk to, my attorneys. Oh my gosh, my attorneys, when it comes to legal matters, I always rely on them for advice and counsel. And then technologists. I keep a cadre of technologists. And as you know, Troy, not all technologists are not created equal. No. There are some people who code. There are some people who are great with building websites. There are some people who can actually build an app, but maybe can't build a website. So they're not all created equal. That's something else that I had to learn.
Yeah.
And so no, I keep a group of people around me that I trust and that I can call on whenever I really need to talk through a particular situation or problem that I'm experiencing in my business.
All right, Alicia, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Dealing with the chaos, because it is chaotic. It is chaotic. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is chaotic. But if you can get on the other side of it, it will be so worth the effort. I promise. There's an excellent book by Seth Godin called The Dip.
Yep,
it's a really small book. Okay. I definitely encourage that anyone who's listening to this, read that book. It's very short. You will definitely read it in a day. And that's exactly what he talks about. There will be moments of chaos. There will be that dip. But if you can just persevere and be tenacious enough to get on the other side of that dip, the promised land is on the other side.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's so many books, Troy, but I would say, again, if there's any one book that I had to point out, it would be that one.
Yep. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
My favorite podcast is Business Wars by the Wondery Network. It's so amazing to hear how these companies kind of duke it out. So every season is a different war. So one season might be UPS versus FedEx, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Tesla versus, I don't know, name any of the regular traditional auto manufacturers. But it's very interesting to hear how these companies start from scratch and eventually become these formidable players in whatever their industry is. And it's amazing how it oftentimes boils down to those 2 key players. And they're so busy fighting each other and being competitive, Troy, that they lose sight of this third emerging company that's growing in the shadows. This is the beauty of the UPS versus FedEx business war. You know, there's this little tiny company called Amazon that just started growing, and now look at where we are. Amazon has surpassed them and then some. So that's definitely my favorite podcast.
I've not heard of that one before. I've just written it down. I'm going to start listening.
Oh gosh, you would so enjoy that.
I assume you also read Jim Collins' Built to Last?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Built to last.
Yeah, because that's great how he has the 21 phenomenal companies and each one has a comparison company. So it's a similar thing comparing,
Yes.
The two. It's wonderful.
And for my profession, for anyone who, if you have heard of Lean or Lean Six Sigma, I definitely recommend reading The Toyota Way by Dr. Jeffrey Liker.
Yeah, great. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
My favorite tool, because I've been talking about technology so much throughout this interview, Notion.
Yes.
Are you familiar with Notion?
I moved to my team this year.
Oh, we use Notion and it has been a game changer. Notion.so.
Yep.
We do everything through Notion. We also use Slack. And the great thing is that there's an integration between Slack and Notion. We build out our project plans in Notion. We have all of our processes documented in Notion. Anything that we need, because we are a fully remote team and we're in different parts of the world, it has just been, and it's visual.
Yep.
I'll do my best to try to explain what I mean when I say that. Unlike something like Dropbox or even Google Drive or Evernote, those other cloud storage solutions, you still have these folders, these nested folders where you can keep all of your digital documentation. The beautiful thing about Notion is that it creates thumbnail images. So if you have pictures, for example, it creates these thumbnails where you can literally see the image, not just a file folder, but an actual image. If you have a video that you want to embed, you can actually see a thumbnail image of that video. It just takes all of your documentation, all of your content, and it makes it extremely visual. So it's that much easier for everyone on your team to quickly find the information that they need so that they can do their jobs. And it has a built-in search function, which makes it even easier to quickly get your hands on information that you might be looking for.
Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Stick with it. Don't doubt yourself. Troy, there have been so many times when people have said, why are you doing that? Well, that's crazy. Well, you can't do that. When I first had that idea for software, people thought I was out of my mind. And sadly, I started listening to them thinking, well, maybe they're right. Or when I first started thinking about having a 100% virtual operation, and my clients were so resistant to that. But I'm so glad I kept working behind in the background, trying to figure out how to make it 100% virtual anyway, despite what they were saying, because you do have to listen to your customers at the end of the day and what they want and how they want it. But that was something where I was really stubborn about that, Troy. And thank goodness I was, because it actually has paid off.
Great. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Alicia. I think the audience got a lot of value out of what you shared with us. Terrific growth from 2005 on your own, and then 12 years later, starting to pile on other people onto the team, fluctuating between 12 and 15 independent contractors and helping a lot of small businesses out there. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Troy. This has been a pleasure.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.